So in this lesson, the inquiry question is, how does disease spread and what are the barriers to the spread of disease? So it's quite important to look at this both from a practical perspective as well as to look at geographical concepts, the theory around how disease diffuses. And we'll look at two kind of factors here. We'll look at relocation and we'll look at expansion of disease. So the first thing that you were asked to do was to discuss this graph, which shows kind of uncontrolled growth in a disease, as well as a flattened out managed scenario. Of course, we're very, very currently looking at this kind of development today with COVID-19. So it's very important to understand the factors that influence the diffusion of a disease in order to inform the way we can manage it. And without the management and without the action of authorities, we're likely to see that very rapid growth in a disease spreading across a population and exceeding the capacity of a healthcare system. And right now, this is what we're desperately trying to achieve, trying to flatten out this curve in the current situation. So when we start to look at the spread of disease, we can see in this first map on the spread of cholera, and this goes back to the original outbreak in 1852 when they really didn't know what cholera was. So what they did was they created this cluster map. And then from that cluster, you can see a kind of a decay with the distance away from a core. There's a clear clustering pattern central to the map. And it was by doing this, they first found the source of cholera, a contaminated water source, that with distance away from that water source, you see a reduction in cholera cases. So in this particular case, you see an outbreak of a disease around a central source. When you looked at this time lapse of the swine flu in 2009, you again see this kind of strong core of its starting, of its starting and emerging, and then you see this rapid relocation and expansion of the disease. And we can see that in the interactive map of COVID-19. So if we bring that one up there, we see COVID-19, of course, emerging in central China, but then quickly moving and spreading across the global network. And then we see South Korea, we see Iran, we see the explosion of cases currently experienced in Italy. And now, the news today, we just heard that there's no new cases in China, but the European crisis with 20,000 new cases just in the last 24 hours in Europe. So we have a kind of a relocation. But first of all, there's an expansion of the disease, then a relocation where we see an expansion again. So how do these diseases spread? Well, these viral infections and flus spread, of course, through our body fluids, and this very graphic video shows that. And then it goes on to talk about the difference between epidemics and pandemics. An epidemic is within a country, a national context, where we see kind of uncontrolled transmission and transfer of a disease across a population. Call it local transmission across the population. And with pandemics, then that has moved to a global context. So we're seeing that in many countries. And again, we're seeing the transmission quite uncontrolled within those countries. And that's the position we are currently finding ourselves in with COVID-19. And so I want to just show you some examples here of theory around disease diffusion. I think I'll first of all show you this idea that some diseases might relocate. So they start in one place and then move to another where they heighten or increase in number. Another idea is that diseases might expand So in this particular case, you see the spread outwards, but you see the expansion of that and growth of that seen highest where it first began. Quite often, we see a combination of these two factors. So we see a spreading outwards, and we see also a concentration and an expansion of that within the central area. Disease, though, spreading outwards and being experienced at different scales as we move away. So I then asked you to look at this map here of the Ebola spread in Sierra Leone in 2014. It's not a significant change really in this graph, except you do see the darkening of the colours increasing as we move forward in the months. So there is a slight relocation or concentration of it, an expansion of it where it first began. You can see that this does get stronger in some areas and it moves outwards as well. But in that time frame, you really don't see a great deal of change within the data set. Of course, there are lots of natural and human ways of managing diseases. So if we think about, first of all, barriers to the spread of disease, you might think about distance as being a barrier. You also might think about environmental factors such as climate. Some diseases thrive in certain environmental or climatic conditions. For example, the mosquito requires warm, humid, and warm, humid climate, and also with lots of rain and tropical climates. There are other natural barriers such as mountain barriers and ocean barriers, which limit the movement of people and therefore limit the spread of a disease. But in our global economy, of course, we've the barrier of distance and the barrier of these natural forces like oceans and mountains is less visible. Aeroplanes will take us to our destination and we see a relocation of that disease as a consequence. So what's really important is that there is coordination around the management of these diseases, and there's clear government strategies that operate at the local, the national and international scale. And that's of course what we're really seeing now with COVID-19. The idea of containing the spread of a disease, the idea of mitigating it and delaying its spread through the restrictions that we're seeing on the movement of people and the containment of people within their homes. So the next lesson I'm going to set will be this simulation of a disease outbreak, where I'm going to put you into groups, and that will follow.